As I always say on these things, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. You will notice this is a bonus episode, a bonus podcast, because I've been joined by my good friend, Nathen Harvey. Nathen, please say hello.
Hey, Jamie. So good to see you. Thanks so much for having me on. And hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're welcome, Nathan. It's always good to be working with you on these things. Now, the reason we're recording this podcast today is because last week I called you and I said, can you take me over these AI numbers in the new DORA? Well, actually, it's not the new DORA report. When would that have come out, the last one?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I run DORA at Google Cloud. DORA is a research program that looks into how do teams get better at delivering and operating software. Each year we publish a report. So there was the 2024 report that came out in October, but just in March we published another report, which was the impact of generative AI in software development.
Was that an addendum or special one-off?
It was kind of a special one-off, if you will. It's interesting, Jamie, because for years, DORA has helped us all understand that the best way to improve software delivery performance is to ship smaller batches more frequently. And yet we publish one annual report. So finally started taking some of our own advice. Maybe we can ship more frequently than annually and get more insights, more lessons learned out there and learn more in the process.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'm sorry for not introducing you properly. I just take it for granted that everybody who knows me knows who you are and knows what DORA is. And I'm pretty sure, well, probably 90% of the people do know you.
That's right. Of course, we should differentiate this from the Digital Operational Resilience Act, because that's not the DORA that I'm representing today.
But the worst thing about that is now part of my world.
Of course.
Your DORA is part of my world. Digital resilience is part of my world because our customers are very interested in continuous compliance, which has become a huge part of what we're doing, because just like once upon a time we helped them shift left on continuous delivery and then security, we're now shifting them left on continuous compliance as part of our cloud work. I will be honest, I never saw a regulatory change become my, big part of our work so quickly before, but because of DORA and similar regulations, continuous compliance has become a big thing for us right now at Container Solutions.
Yeah, well, I like to say that DORA, the research program, and the insights that you get from there around software delivery performance, as you put those into practice, you're going to be better at DORA, the compliance regime that has come in.
Absolutely. So anyway, back to the main conversation. So the reason I called you last week is because I took a good look at the DORA reports, the latest one, the one from March about generative AI.
Yes.
And I'm going to share the links when I share this video. However, the thing that jumps out at you immediately is that people are not having 100 and 200% increases in productivity. Now, do you mind stepping the listeners through those numbers and maybe explaining why what's on the internet 1,000% improves in productivity? Why is that not being reflected in the DORA report presently?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to do so. So basically what we do with DORA is we want to understand software delivery performance. And so we have measures that you might know as the DORA metrics that help teams understand how software delivery performance is going. And at a very high level, they really measure things like what is the throughput of change and what is the stability of those changes. So when we've done our latest research, of course, we want to understand the impact of AI, and that research is ongoing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What we're seeing is that as teams adopt more and more AI, they are seeing some real benefits. Job satisfaction tends to go up, documentation quality improves, burnout goes down, code complexity actually drops some. So all of these are really strong indicators. But then when we look to software delivery performance, what we're actually seeing is that throughput of those applications actually goes down. Throughput in terms of changes that you're able to deploy. And what's worse is stability actually drops off even further. So in other words, what we're seeing as more and more teams are adopting AI, seeing that they're able to ship slower and that they're more likely to roll back those changes or have to push forward a hot fix when they do that deployment. This is maybe a little bit surprising. And honestly, when I think about this, Jamie, DORA has always been a tool that can help you or research that can help you as a team identify a constraint. And, when we think about a system of delivering software, it's just like any other system. There's always a constraint or a bottleneck somewhere. And if you think for a minute about how your application team comes together to deliver software and what holds you up, it's probably not the speed with which you generate code or the amount of code that you generate. It's probably something else, like potentially your incentives are misaligned, that they aren't enabling that. Maybe code review process takes a long time, or it's hard to get feedback on the changes that you're making. So essentially, we're seeing AI help in other parts of the system, but not necessarily in the bottleneck.
Right. So just let me get this straight. Before we move to that bottleneck, did you
Yeah.
just say that AI is helping teams to be happier, burn out less, but is also making systems more unstable?
Yes,
Right.
indeed.
Okay. So the question is there a net gain, or are we happier and slightly less productive, or what's the reason? Is it a quality issue?
Yeah, I think unfortunately our data can't tell us exactly what the reason is, but of course we have a bunch of hypotheses, and we do think that quality is potentially one of the issues. But I also think like it, to me it oftentimes boils down to the speed with which you can get feedback and the quality of that feedback. And Jamie, just think about your own experience as a developer. If you've been asked to review a code change, and that code change is maybe, I don't know, call it tens of lines, 10, 20, 30 lines of code. As a reviewer, you might have 3 or 4 comments on that. At the same time, if you're asked to review a code change and it's hundreds or thousands of lines of code, as a reviewer, what are you most likely to do? Looks good to me, ship it. Right? You're not going to dig into it, right? And so I think that this potentially is one of the sort of the side effects that we're seeing as we use Gen AI to generate more code. We're trying to ship larger changes. We're not getting the good feedback that we need on those changes.
I think we have to be careful to jump to the wrong conclusion. But what I can say is my system one brain, my quick brain, is telling me because generative AI is very persuasive, it tends to say things that are almost right. You're
Yes.
likely to miss a small mistake in code that looks superficially spot on. So therefore, the developer or the person who wrote it is happier because they've got the changes through quicker. It was less effort for them. They go home happier and the system becomes
Yes.
more unstable at exactly the same point in time. Well, this is remarkable. This is remarkable, Nathan, that you've got data, you've got a few hypotheses, and wow,
Yeah, it is really fascinating. DORA's been around for over a decade researching these type of technology-driven teams, and so we're very excited to be at the beginning of yet another movement. Right? We've seen cloud, we've seen containers. Now we're at the beginning of this AI movement, and being able to watch as this evolves over time is super exciting for us.
Now, last week we did speak about my book briefly. Now, I must apologise to the internet. Somebody told me there's no point writing a book if you're not willing to promote it. So you may have noticed I've been quite busy promoting this damn book. But one of the themes in Visionaries, Rebels and Machines, which I think is very important, that is worth sharing, is we saw it with Edison, then we saw it with Bell Labs, then we saw it with the PC, and then we saw it with cloud, and we're going to see it with AI. The creators of a general purpose technology never quite don't predict or don't dictate its destiny. It's the users. So it was the applications of the grid, toasters, radios, TVs, that dictated its destiny. Thomas Edison certainly didn't envisage radios and televisions being plugged into his grid. So when we met last week, I asked you, I presented that idea to you, and then I said to you,
Yeah.
okay, could Gen AI ever give us a 10x boost in productivity? And this is the conclusion I remember, but you've got to correct me if I am now just
Yeah.
if I'm hallucinating. So what we said was, if you've got an elite performer, and by that I mean the official DORA, do you still call it the elite performers, Nathan?
The elite performance is the top category for software delivery performance.
Right.
Yes.
And so an
Yeah.
elite performer would be able to roll forward and roll backwards quickly. On the technical side, the continuous integration and deployment would be sorted. However, they would also have a generative culture, I'm guessing.
Yes.
They would feel safe to fail. And then you had the genius idea, so I won't take credit for this. And you said if all of that was set up, which would basically make that an extremely productive team and company anyway, maybe, just maybe, Gen AI could produce hypotheses, A/B tests, but it would be more like A, B, C, D, E, F, G
Yes.
tests, and we could get feedback on potential new features quicker. That was what you said, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think that one of the most exciting things about AI is this ability for me to create things very quickly. And if I'm thinking intentionally about what am I creating, I'm creating experiments. And an experiment needs to meet the real world to get good feedback. And so you're right. Maybe in the time that it took me in the past to create one experiment, I could create 5 or 7 or 10 experiments. But if I don't have a good delivery system, I can't get any of those experiments into production. And so I can't get any feedback on them. And I think that on the flip side, this also kind of points to this ability for us as teams potentially to be able to run in production multiple experiments at a time, whether that's through feature flagging or some other way of distributing load. And then maybe AI can actually help us also evaluate the results that we're seeing on that production side.
It's really funny. You've just triggered an ancient memory in me. Ian and I were working with a great company and they were super innovative, but their deployment system was so broken. They had lots of POCs that they could never get into the
Yes.
hands of real
Yes.
users. And we're like, you've got to get your foundation right. So that was a team that was already going quickly. And I suppose it points back to, I met Dave Farley a few weeks ago on this podcast to discuss continuous delivery. And I think we came to the conclusion that continuous delivery was to software quality what smoking was to health. If you want to improve your life chances by changing one thing, stop smoking.
Yes.
And if you want to improve software delivery by changing one thing or software quality, make sure you've got continuous integration and then continuous delivery.
Yeah.
Is that still reflected in the DORA metrics?
That is reflected in the DORA metrics, I think. And I know that I know Dave is a big fan of those DORA metrics because of the empirical evidence that we have that helps back them up. And we've got over a decade of that evidence that bears that out. So I think that is really important. And then I think the important piece there, though, is that while we do have those metrics, the majority of the research is not about the metrics themselves, but rather the capabilities and conditions that you need to have in place to drive those metrics. And so that's where all of the real insights come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my two frustrations with helping teams with DORA is the first thing would be you've got to focus on the basics. So we've got to get that build automation right. But the second thing that I used to focus on is because this was a common pattern in my work. In fact, it still is. You'd come across technically very capable teams, but they were not quite getting to that elite level. And that's because they'd ignored the leadership components. So a huge part of the DORA report and all of the work you're doing is around generative leadership, safety to fail, psychological safety. You can't, because you've got the mechanical stuff, you've got a great system for experimentation, but then nobody's got the space to run the actual experiments themselves.
Exactly. And that culture can be so powerful as well, right? I was talking with a team just today, and we were talking about the fear of pushing the button, right? So if you live in an environment where if I push the button and something goes off, something goes wrong, then the fingers are going to start pointing at me. If that's the case, like no tool can fix that for you. You have to change the approach that the organization takes.
I've got a question for you, but this is not a tangent, I promise. And I'm only asking these questions because I've tested it this morning on my wife. Would you, if you had to sit an exam and you obviously were nervous, nobody wants to fail, would you be trying to get an A or would you be trying to avoid it getting a C? So i.e., would you be relieved with a B or would you be disappointed with a B?
Yeah. Man, this is a very personal question, Jamie.
Very personal. Maybe you should. Well, maybe you don't have to answer it. Well, it is. It gets to the heart. The reason I'm asking is because everybody has a different relationship to failure depending on hereditable personality traits. So you have those people who, and we're all different, and so you don't have to answer the question. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But the point is that the teams we work with very much would be divided roughly into those two types of personality sort of ideas. The relationship with failure is different. And I think that would have an effect. If there were too many of one sort of person, people would be avoiding taking risks, whereas a different type would be desperate to try to take more risks.
Yeah. And just speaking very personally, if I'm being honest, I would probably be shooting for that A. But the advice I would give to myself, and I've given this same advice to my children in the past, is don't worry about the A. Worry about doing better than you did last time. Better than you did last time is the goal that you should set. And in fact, with DORA, we have a tagline, and that tagline is get better at getting better. It is that continuous improvement and continuous learning. That's how you get there. I don't want, back to the elite performers, Jamie, I don't want you to be an elite performer. I want you to be an elite improver.
That's right.
Because that's how you'll get there.
I think if you want to improve, if you regularly improve, I teach and I coach children's sports. And at this age, the teenage years, physically, some children explode. And I teach all of the children, just hang in there because incremental improvements will, you will catch up eventually. And then when that happens, if you've developed the habit of incremental improvement, you will take over the person who has never developed that habit, who was, let's say, naturally very big or talented. Since you've done a full disclosure, I'll do one. I only let go of the fear of failure to find space for the, dreams of success in the last few years. and
Yeah.
I'll be 50 next year. So failure does not come naturally to me. And obviously I write about it. And when I'm on podcasts, I'm always cheerful.
Yes.
This masks, reasonably insecure person, starting with tests that I used to fail when I was a computer programmer, all the way up to failures at the work level and the business level now. A lot of people, it's not very cool, is it, to say, oh, we all learn from failure. Yeah, but it sucks.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Right, Nathen, I'm going to let you get going soon because you're at the DevOps conference in Amsterdam. Is that correct?
That's right. DevOps Days Amsterdam is on this week.
What are
Yes.
you going to be speaking about?
So I'm running a workshop to help teams identify where's the bottleneck in their own software delivery process, so that they can start thinking about how do we improve that.
Right, cool. So let me just summarize for the sake of the people listening in. So the first thing we spoke about was this new sort of mid-cycle one-off DORA report that included findings about artificial intelligence. It discovered, point two, that people are happier when they use AI, but the stability of the system goes down. We don't know the reason yet, but we can hypothesize as to why that might be. And then I think the third thing I really wanted to mention is that you were about to send out the survey for the next report. Is that correct?
That's right. In fact, we just launched it last week. So we want to help us as an industry, and we want to help you as an individual and as a team continue to get better. And in order to do so, we need more insights. And so I would really encourage your team to go to dora.dev/survey. This is where we're collecting information and asking questions for this year's report. But I want you to do this. I want you to complete this survey for a very selfish reason. Completing this survey is a great moment for you and your team to pause and reflect on how you're doing today. And you do not need to wait for our report to come out. You do not need to wait for the findings. I think that careful consideration of the questions is going to give you some insights already, some ideas about what you could go and improve next. So don't take it for me. Take it for yourself. Dora.dev/survey.
We're going to share the link in the comments. Just a quick question, Nathen. Is the survey something that you would do with the whole team?
What I recommend is that each individual on the team do it on their own, and then come together as a team and discuss it. Which ideas stuck with you from that survey? Which questions were easy to answer or hard to answer? Where do you think we have opportunities for improvement? The other reason I mention that is because there is some randomization in the survey. So if you do it as a team, you're more likely to get the full complement of questions that we ask.
What an amazing tip. What a fantastic tip. So take a moment to pause, reflect, do it individually, come together as a team, and then based on that conversation, work out what you may be able to do better in the next cycle.
Absolutely.
Remarkably wise words as always, Nathen. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great time in Amsterdam.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie. And thanks for this bonus episode.
Anytime. And all of you listeners or viewers, don't forget to fill in the survey and don't forget to download the report from DORA in regards to the findings of artificial intelligence. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.